All right, we will get started since it's the top of the hour. Thank you all for attending today's webinar. A few quick housekeeping notes before we get started. You're all muted, but feel free to use the chat feature and the Q&A panel for any questions. We'll be addressing those at the end of our session. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our host, Cheryl.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you for your registration questions, which we will cover. I'm Cheryl Last from SkillDirector, and let's just jump right in. Prior to the pandemic, there was already a huge shift in skill requirements taking place due to what's called the fourth industrial revolution. That's the impact of automation, digitization, and AI on how work gets done, and the resulting impact on workers. But all that was just sort of fast-forwarded by like 1,000,000% with the pandemic. So you can see, according to the McKinsey and Company research that's on the slide, leaders who say that capability building is important to their organization's long-term growth is up 19 points over pre-pandemic numbers. That's this one right up here on the top. 58% say that closing skill gaps is a higher priority, and 69% are doing more skill building. And most leaders actually expect skill gaps soon, if not right now. In fact, by the end of 2020, a Monster.com survey showed that 80% of employers had difficulty filling positions due to skill gaps. Now, lastly, the tree diagram over here shows the top skills that businesses are prioritizing. And we'll get into more on that in a minute. But one thing I want to point out here is that you can see that these skills listed are not what we would consider to be technical skills. Additionally, the World Economic Forum has determined that 42% of jobs will require different skills in the next 3 years. Over 1 billion workers will need reskilling by 2030, and that time to reskill, well, that could take anywhere between a month or a year, just depending on the complexity of the job and the actual skills that are needed. And on average, the shelf life of a skill is less than 5 years, which actually reinforces the importance of upskilling, even if you have no skill gaps today. You can no longer just put your feet up on the table and say, nope, I'm good, no skill gaps here. You have to get ready for the regular change in skills required. Now, the title of this webinar is Leverage Competency-Based Learning to Upskill Employees on Skills of the Future. But maybe your leaders aren't talking about upskilling and reskilling. Maybe they're talking about skill gaps. Maybe they're talking about how it's so hard to find the right person to hire, or retention problems. Maybe you hear managers say, oh, this person is really good technically, but they just can't do other things. They can't think creatively. They can't resolve problems on their own, or they're not building relationships or working collaboratively. I've got really smart people, but they just can't get along. Or maybe they're talking about a new transformation, digitization, automation, or artificial intelligence initiative. How are they going to be successful with all that? Or maybe they're talking about dealing with things that are somewhat out of their control, like supply chain issues, part shortages, labor shortages, or geopolitical changes. That requires resiliency. And resilience is the ability to adapt and flex when such issues are encountered. That's a key differentiator between the companies who succeed and those who fail during such challenges. And all of these subjects point to the skills of the future. And these are the kinds of conversations we're going to talk about how to address. Now, before we go any further, one common question we hear is, well, what's the difference between upskilling and reskilling? Upskilling is about closing skill gaps for the current job, and reskilling has to do with learning new skills for a different job. So if you have skill gaps in your current role, then you need to upskill to ensure you can do your job, and so that you remain relevant, because those requirements will continue changing. That's what McKinsey means by, by the World Economic Forum means by the half-life of a skill is 5 years. Now, if your job is going away because of automation, well, then you might need to reskill for a different job. Or if you're currently in marketing, but from a career perspective, you might want to move into sales or product management, well, then you're going to need to reskill to learn the skills required for those other roles. When you talk about, or when you hear people talk about internal mobility, big topic, and moving people who have some, but not all the skills they need, well, that's where reskilling comes in. And depending on your role, because of the number of unfilled positions that most companies have right now, some might have to both upskill to stay current and also reskill to temporarily do the job of others. So with that as a context, let's look at what you say is going on in your organizations. And we love analyzing the data from the registration survey since it's usually a pretty good indicator of what's really going on globally. One of the most important skills that you can develop is the ability to both analyze data and also use it to tell a story. So here's how we do that here. 64% are not using competency or skills assessment to identify skill gaps. And while 70% of you say you have an upskill or reskill initiative in progress, 69% of you aren't actually doing anything about it. And 40% are not using experiential learning to close skill gaps. Those are the data points. Let's talk about the story. Essentially, 2 out of 3 of your organizations don't know if you have skill gaps. More than 2/3 of you are not doing anything about it. And for those of you who are trying, almost half of you are not using the most effective means of closing gaps. How's that for a story? And by the way, according to McKinsey statistics, what you're seeing on the slide is actually pretty well universally supported. Now I'm going to say that a different way. Imagine walking into your senior leader's office and saying, I know you promoted an upskill reskill initiative and we're now in progress. However, we have no idea what skill gaps we have, and well, therefore nothing we're doing is actually focused on closing those gaps. And those things we are doing are probably the least effective means of making a difference. How's that going to go over? Probably not so well. But what if the next thing that you said was, well, that being said, I've come up with a way for us to pinpoint exactly what skill gaps we have, focusing on skills that will transcend our current jobs and changes that we know we'll have, so that we can apply the most effective means of closing those gaps with targeted upskilling and reskilling activities. Do I have your support? Now, would that work with your leaders? I want that to soak in, because if you can start to have these types of honest and advisory conversations with your leaders, it really will change your relationship with them, with you, and give you a better seat at the business table. Now, if you can get to that magic yes, well, then you have the ability to, you have the ability and the green light to make a real difference in your organization. But, of course, now you're going to have to deliver. While there are also new technical skills that will continue to change, what we're going to focus on are a set of skills of the future where you can make an immediate difference. These skills complement technical skills. They transcend jobs such that they remain critical to success, even while other aspects of the job change rapidly. So today we're going to talk about not just what those skills are, but why they matter, so that you have the ability to tell that story in your own organization. We'll talk about how to find out if employees have those skills. I think that just came into the chat. And how to also create a thriving competency-based learning initiative that will help you to develop them. Now, we investigated the critical skills that leading experts and organizations say are the most required to thrive in the fourth industrial revolution. These are the human skills such as critical thinking, creativity, adaptability, problem solving, and emotional intelligence. We don't like calling them soft skills, which really diminishes their importance. So we're going to call them power skills, or simply the skills of the future. Power skills are growing in importance because automation, digitization, and AI can't replace them. They outlast the impact of tech developments. They are the differentiator between the person who can do the job and the person who can do the job with a level of excellence that ensures both their personal success and also their ability to contribute to their organization's mission and business results. A Harvard study actually indicates that 80% of your career achievement will be determined by these power skills. 80%, that's big. And the studies that support this are just too many to mention. It's clear that technical skills are important to get a job, but it's the power skills that impact retention, performance, and career growth. However, in most cases, these power skills are not explicitly taught in school or university. So even if you have people with great technical skills, there may be something that's missing. Remember the comment I made early on about how you can have some people who just can't get along? Hence the growing skill gap problem. And by the way, all of the links that you see at the bottom of the chart, these are all actual clickable links so you can get to the raw data that this comes from. Even knowing what the skills of the future are and the statistics about their importance, it's often really hard to tell a story that will drive change in your organization. In fact, there were some registration questions about driving leader buy-in. So let's take a moment to look at a few of these skills of the future so that you can easily explain why technical skills alone won't be enough and why they impact success so greatly. And we want you to use these examples, which of course you're going to get in the downloadable PowerPoint, to demonstrate the importance of these skills as they relate to positions within your organization. So, creativity. If you lack a creative mindset, then when you're facing a recurring problem, you're going to continue to try to solve it the same way you have in the past, with slim to no chance that the problem will be solved, or the process will be improved, or even that the desired result will occur. Because if you had, it wouldn't be recurring. And isn't that kind of the definition of insanity, just doing the same thing over and over again and expecting something different to result? Creativity is never so important as in a time of crisis or opportunity. So those with creativity can address challenges and capitalize on opportunities better than others. As an example, when supply chain issues strike, some will just throw their hands in the air and tell customers, well, I just can't deliver. But others use creativity to create workarounds, substitute parts, use different delivery schedules, and even other means to continue to meet customer needs. Creativity is a key component of resilience. And in a more traditional sense, a software programmer without the ability or the initiative to think outside the box isn't going to bring new ideas to the table to help to differentiate their company's software from the competition. They won't make their tools any more engaging to users. They're just going to code what they're given. That's creativity. Now, without the ability to think critically, people will risk assessing a situation without really understanding the implications of a particular course of action or decision they might make. So let's say you're trying to solve a customer support issue, and you don't take the time to analyze what the issue really is versus what the company is telling you. Well, you could respond in a way that actually makes the matter worse. Now, I'm betting all of you have talked to a call center agent and experienced this situation. They are following a script, and won't actually consider that your problem is outside of the script. How annoying is that? Well, with critical thinking, you find out the ask behind the ask so you actually can solve the right problem. A field technician who operates only on a common set of troubleshooting procedures and can't analyze or apply any kind of creative critical thinking, they're going to be unable to solve company or customer problems that are outside of the norm. And having employees who can analyze and think critically is absolutely essential to an organization's ability to stay competitive and to be resilient when challenges arise. So let's look at decision making. Now, it may seem obvious that without good decision making, you might make decisions without considering future consequences. Let me give you an example of one that's a little bit more complex. So let's say there's a perceived pricing issue with a key component of your supply chain, and you're unhappy that the supplier won't lower the price. So you go to a competitor who offers a lower price. The product arrives, but it's of lower quality. That then causes production issues. That slows manufacturing, and it causes you to miss delivery commitment to one of your largest customers, who you then lose, causing your company to lose millions of dollars in business, all so you could save a few bucks. So this is where the concept of systems thinking also comes into play. Lack of understanding of potential future consequences of decisions can cause tremendous problems that reverberate throughout an organization, just like our example. But those with good decision-making skills, they identify whether others are needed to make a decision, and they involve them. They look upstream and downstream at implications. They fully consider the alternatives and risks, and they create scenario plans to support the best possible outcome. In other words, they build in resilience. You're going to hear me use that word a few more times in this webinar today. Now, collaboration inspires creativity, higher levels of productivity, and motivation when it's used properly. So a researcher who works exclusively independently misses out on the opportunity to share findings and learn from others, resulting in less innovation and fewer discoveries. A sales director who's got a new competitor who's taking away market share might, without collaboration, just try a bunch of things, different tactics that may not be successful and waste time. But what if you were skilled in collaboration? You would be quick to bring together the right people to brainstorm your competitive differentiators and determine how to act on them quickly. You can also learn how others have faced similar situations in the past and gather insights on the customer perspective and come away with a rapid plan of action. And another recent example, if you are working in a health system, then without collaboration, you might make plans in a vacuum on how to address rapidly escalating numbers of cases of some health issue. But with collaboration, you might actually engage all the local health systems to come up with a plan for maximizing local resources in order to tackle that problem systemically. Persuasion is the art of convincing others to change their beliefs, opinions, or actions to your way of thinking. It's basically building a business case to get others to agree with you. Now, some people are natural persuaders, but for those who aren't, this skill is rarely developed, and that's a shame. Because while the act of persuasion can be subtle, because at its best, people don't even realize they're being persuaded, it can be extremely powerful. And if you think about it, persuasion is actually the key to the kingdom when it comes to things like sales success and also people management. So salespeople who are skilled in persuasion have shorter sales cycles, better results, and higher commission with actually lower effort. Project managers who are skilled in persuasion get people from cross-functional teams to work together with mutual accountability. Managers who are skilled in persuasion get their team to buy into their philosophy, their approach, and their strategies more seamlessly, while team members feel good about doing it. And it's the key to overall job satisfaction. Being able to convince others to agree with your opinions and ideas not only makes you feel important, but it also helps you to accomplish more. Now, active learning is the skill of continuous learning. Without active learning, a software developer is going to quickly lose the ability to keep up because the changes in technology and approaches are so frequent. Without active learning, a product manager will be unable to understand enough about industry, competition, trends, manufacturing improvements, customer needs in order to create real products that sell. But with active learning, a salesperson can understand the changing needs of a potential customer before the competition does, providing them with solutions to problems that that customer is only beginning to recognize that they have. And very importantly, with active learning, each person can remain current, regardless of the pace of change, helping them to remain adaptable, which is another skill of the future. And this may make active learning actually the most important skill of all. And that really segues into the last one we're going to talk about, adaptability. So a logistics coordinator without adaptability can't work well when new software is introduced, leading to frustration and delayed deliveries. A salesperson without adaptability can't handle changes in processes, methodology, systems, products, and that's going to lead to lower sales and income for the organization. An individual without adaptability can't easily make a last-minute transition from office work to work from home and maybe back to hybrid, and they'd lose tremendous productivity. And as we've seen over these last few years, the ability to shift focus and priorities quickly with minimal downtime and lost productivity is the difference between keeping a business from failing in an unexpected crisis. In other words, adaptability makes an organization resilient. And the whole point of going through these examples was to give you the story, to help you to be able to explain to leaders how each of the skills of the future impacts everything else, and how without the skills of the future, the technical skills almost won't matter. So I want you to stop for a moment, and I want you to ask yourself this question. What happens if you ignore skills of the future in your organization? What happens if you just stay the course, doing what you're doing? What happens in 1 year? What's going to happen in 3 years? In 5 years? Just stop and think about how much those skills of the future impact your organization, regardless of what industry you're in or the mission of your organization. These skills of the future complement technical skills, and they drive productivity, results, employee satisfaction, and retention. And I think all of those are things that you probably and your leaders probably care about. In the future of work, these skills are the ones that will ensure your organization remains competitive, relevant, and resilient. So the question is, how can you ensure that employees have those skills of the future? And I know that's one of the questions that you all have today. So, and again, some of your registration questions as well as the chat were about how to identify whether or not employees have them. And the answer is simple. You have to assess people's capabilities, but you have to do it in a safe environment where the goal is development and not performance management. You can't use this approach to determine who to keep and who to fire. Rather, what you're doing is you're using it to determine how to make each person the best they can be, and from the organization's perspective, how to get the most out of each person. So competency assessments quantify the size of your skill gaps. Why is that important? And think back to the story that I told you about the registration data. Most organizations are blissfully unaware of the quantity and size of their skill gaps. They know they have them, but they don't know how large and widespread they are. And therefore, they can't inform organizational plans, priorities, and strategy. So think about that for a moment. If you don't know what you can and can't do, how are you going to be successful? How can you truly define what your organization's strengths are and which opportunities you should pursue, or what you should do about it if you have gaps? How are you going to be able to do your job? Now, if you're a senior leader and you don't have either, whatever you want to call it, competency assessment data or skill gap analysis, you should be scared, because you are making business decisions that are based on inadequate data. But when it comes to understanding organizational capability, you don't have to be in the dark. Competency assessment will show you the data and show you the light. And that's where the best decisions can be made about what to do in the business, and also where we need to upskill and reskill staff and on which skills. So the competency assessments actually tell you what action to take. Delivering competency assessments and using them to create a culture of learning such that upskilling and reskilling can take place continuously, that is hopefully a part of your job description. That is ensuring people have the skills required to do their current job and any job that they would have in the future, or how their job evolves. But without skills assessment data, you have no ability to mitigate skill gaps effectively. So a competency assessment or skills assessment is where you use some technology to enable each person to measure how well, using behavioral examples, someone does the skill. So the individual's selected proficiency level is then compared with the target level of proficiency, what they need to be able to do, their requirements, defining either that they are proficient or that they have skill gaps. Now, we call these things behavioral examples, and they are the key to consistent, accurate, and objective assessment. So here's an example that you see associated with influence and persuade others to drive action. So we talked about the persuasion skill. Now, these behaviors have to be specific enough so that an individual can clearly identify in which level they best belong, so that they can have a data-driven conversation with their manager about what it means to be proficient in these skills. In one of our pre-registration questions, somebody asked, how do you handle it if the manager and an individual don't agree? Well, you come back to these examples, and these become a great coaching conversation. And while it's wonderful that the organization gets all this fabulous data, there is an even more important benefit of this competency assessment process. And it's that it motivates each person to become their best self. Some of you might be familiar with Daniel Pink and his research. He's got a great L&D related book called Drive. His research shows that people are driven to mastery. Now, when I assess my skills in a competency model, which is this middle step, first of all, I become aware of the expectations. The expectations are the requirements. And you can call these requirements, you could call this a competency model, a capability framework, a skills matrix, it doesn't matter. You need to become aware of the expectations of your role. And when I see the results from my competency assessment, I actually can acknowledge where I am. That is my capabilities and my skill gaps. So think of it kind of like GPS. I know where I am and where I need to go. And I should then be motivated to take action, the third step over here, to close my gaps, which is to consume competency-based learning to help me to get there. Now, some people asked for a few best practices, so we wanted you to have a few of these as a takeaway. So just one to point out here is that in order for competency assessment to work, you can't have a manager assessment without a self-assessment, because there won't be any buy-in to the results. So you want to start with a self-assessment and then add the manager assessment, and even optionally those from peers or subject matter experts. And another best practice is to tie each skill of the future to a business impact or a key performance indicator or KPI in order to help each person understand the impact of the skill gap to them. So not just that I have a skill gap, but if I don't close that gap, this is the impact that I'm going to have on the business. Now, if you have the ability, you would assess people on both the skills of the future and also their functional or technical skills. That's going to give you a full picture for both for you and for them of their gaps. And while that's certainly possible and certainly what's recommended, that scale and scope often scares learning and development and leaders alike. So if you can't persuade your leaders to go all in, then the alternative is that you focus on the skills of the future first, which can then be used across roles, and then you can add the functional skills in later. Okay, so our step one was the competency assessment, and then step two is that you've got to help them to act. So a competency assessment is simply a means to an end. When people talk about, oh, I got an assessment, it's done, that's not really going to get you to your end point. Now, you can't get to the end without the competency assessment, but it's what happens next that sets people on a course for success. So competency-based learning is learning that helps you to be able to perform the required skill at the target level of proficiency, regardless of whether that's for upskilling or reskilling. Remember the motivation part. You need people to want to act. So you want to promote personal benefits of developing skills of the future. For example, things like that they will have increased value in the market. It will give them career advancement, help them with internal mobility, help them to develop better client and colleague relationships, resulting in a positive working environment, and certainly also recognition and rewards. You also, again, want to tie those business impacts to the skills, making it easy for each person to see the potential impact on their objectives. It further drives motivation for them to act and learn. And then it also helps leaders quickly connect the dots between large team or organizational skill gaps and the potential business impact, helping to gain their support for supporting ongoing professional development. Going back to that, making bad decisions if they don't have data, this is going to help them avoid that. Then, of course, you do assessments over time. It will enable you to see the change in skill associated with the action that they're taking. And, of course, you'll measure the change in results and business impacts over time as well. Now, this survey that I'm showing on the slide shows that aligning learning to skill gaps is what most people felt would make learning more relevant to their job and career goals. The more relevant something is for people, the more they accept it, agree with it, and use it. So knowing that the learning recommendations or resources available to them are targeted to their personal skill gaps is what drives their buy-in. You can also see here, the next two lines here, that assessments to find out where I need improvement and providing opportunity to apply what I've learned are also super important. Now, hopefully you're starting to see how this all works and comes together, the motivation of it. So now let's talk about how do you actually learn or improve on skills of the future. So learning skills of the future is, really different than just learning technical skills, because a simple classroom or e-learning is not going to teach them. They really require practice, the experiential learning, and they need to apply it to real work. They need to observe or practice with mentors. They need to have trial and error. So now I'd like to look back at some of the examples that we discussed earlier. We talked about creativity, and we've got our logistics and distribution manager who needs to get critical products to customers. We've got a plant manager that needs to increase production and capitalize on opportunistic demand. and we've got a software programmer that needs to figure out how to make the product more differentiated and engaging. So I want to ask you, we're going to do a poll question. How would each of these people best learn creativity? Either by watching an e-learning course or by watching a micro-learning video on creativity techniques, or by taking that real problem and applying creativity techniques through a guided skill practice. What do you think? You should see a poll pop up, and Hannah will display the responses here in a second. Okay, you guys did great, 100%. I think you're going to see that hands-on, and here are some examples, because we really want you to walk away not just with the theoretical that experiential learning is the best approach, but we want you to see specific examples. So here are 3 specific examples that you might use for developing creativity. And again, you're going to have this, so I'm not going to read through these, but these are specific skill practices and opportunities. And you'll notice that all of them start with, for a specific situation you have now, for the particular problem you have now, for a particular innovation you want to implement. It's all about applying it to real work. So let's look at another one. Okay, we're talking back at critical thinking. So you've got a customer support agent, needs to be able to solve customer issues. A technician needs to figure out some, unique problems, and local government officials trying to get the right health supplies to the right place at the right time. Which one of these, and we'll do another quick poll question, would you learn this by watching an e-learning course, watching a micro-learning video, or by taking that real problem and applying critical thinking techniques through a guided skill practice? Oh, very nicely done, everybody. 100% got that it was using a skill practice. I know that this is kind of, I'm reviewing these a couple of times, but it's really important to see what we're talking about so that you can then take this back to your leaders who want to do the same old techniques and not making the progress that are really needed to drive the skills of the future. So here are, again, a couple of examples. So you want to have an actual project or a situation that you face, a report you need to prepare, a decision you need to make. So when you download this presentation, you'll have an opportunity to see and use these. You're welcome to use these. In fact, we encourage you to use these. So we'll do one last poll here. We've got a software engineer trying to fix a reported error with an application, a project manager with an unexpected issue, technician with a new problem, and again, trying to use limited supplies. How are you going to learn this best? E-learning, micro-learning video, or actually applying techniques to a real problem? And once again, you guys, 100%, great job. When you actually look at the examples and you look at the scenarios, it becomes incredibly obvious, I hope, for you. It has, obviously, because you answered the question correctly. But hopefully it will be for your colleagues and for your leaders. And for consistency, we wanted you to see some examples of this type of learning, too. Again, for a particular problem you have, right? That's helping you to be able to do that. Or, in fact, in the last one, it's actually creating a matrix for yourself that can be used on problems that you will have. So, again, we just wanted you to have some examples. Now, as you've seen, these are not the types of skills that you can learn by watching. Skills of the future require doing. And in fact, the image on the screen is from one of the skill practices that we shared as an example. And so that just that you can see kind of what that looks like. So again, if you look at the example, pick a problem you are currently facing or a decision you need to make. So the examples need to be something real, not a case study. And the reason for that is a case study still is a little bit too theoretical. Its application but it eliminates the ability to actually get work done. What we want to do is we want to combine learning and working. So a skill practice, what we were kind of talking about, provides step-by-step instructions, typically with examples using real work. And again, the benefits of this approach is that the learning transfers more quickly when you're applying it to something real and the actual work gets done. So on the screen, you can see this is an example, and then you would have a template to actually put the answers to your problem that you were trying to solve. So you learn how to perform complex problem solving, and you solve the actual problem using the best techniques. So it's not just the best way to learn, it's actually practical and efficient. Those are two words that senior leaders love to hear. And that is how you're going to get senior leader buy-in to the new approach. So 40% of you are not using experiential learning. 60% of you who are, that's continuing to promote it and making sure that it's applied to these skills of the future. Another thing that's really great about this experiential learning technique and this skill practice concept is that learners can't argue that they have no time for learning when learning is doing the work. And because skill practices are self-driven, unlike an actual course, they scale well. They actually take next to no time to build. They are easy to maintain over time. They support development regardless of whether or not the team works in an office or virtually or is even mostly on the road. And a college degree is not required to use them. So this is a really great tool that you can use. Skill practices also often leverage collaborative learning, which is working with mentors or peers. And this is not just skill practices, this is experiential learning. It's a great way to learn skills of the future. McKinsey calls this modern mentorship, where everybody both teaches and learns. So if you're good at something, you become a teacher, but if you have a skill gap, then maybe that person who you were teaching then helps you to do that. And there are huge benefits that come from that, from using this approach, including those benefits for mentors and for the organization. Here you've got a blog post that provides more details that you can use to drive buy-in for this technique. And you want to use your competency development tool to identify available and suitable mentors. Now, each skill practice should have a learning objective. And the learning objective should match the needed behavior in the competency model. So if I need to be a level 3, then my competency development tool should recommend skill practices with learning objectives that are tied to level 3 behaviors. If I need to be a level 4 in my role, maybe as a frontline manager, my competency development tool will recommend skill practices with learning objectives tied to my level 4 behaviors, which you see here. And we have an entire webinar dedicated to teaching you how to create these in a day. We've got a link here. And then if you want to buy them, we have pre-built skill practices, both those from SkillDirector and also from Duke University. Now, I think this is probably kind of obvious from our conversation, but another really great benefit of this whole skill practice and self-directed learning is that it teaches people to learn how to learn. That's active learning, and it's the most important skill. People realize that by following steps with examples, they can actually teach themselves the skills they need now and in the future. And it's really empowering. And it is essential to stay relevant, which is, of course, why active learning is one of the skills of the future. We really like the analogy of a learning treadmill. So you don't have to run to maintain your skills. You just have to walk at a steady pace and keep moving forward. But if you stop, you'll kind of fall off the back. Now, according to the World Economic Forum, one-time reskilling and upskilling efforts are just simply not enough to deal with long-term transformations. Companies need to build this culture of lifelong learning, which enables each person to continuously improve their competencies. And it's just like the learning treadmill. So hopefully at this point, you know what the skills of the future are, why they're so important in ensuring success for all jobs. Competency assessments quantify the size of your skill gap so that senior leaders know your organizational strengths and gaps, informing which opportunities you should pursue or what you should do to upskill and reskill staff. Competency assessments also tell people what action to take, and you can use that data to create a culture of learning such that upskilling and reskilling can happen continuously. For each skill gap found, each individual should be automatically recommended the right competency-based learning that can help them to successfully close skill gaps. Only experiential learning, such as skill practices, can do this. And the benefits and the efficiencies of using that type of approach are really difficult to dispute, and hopefully will lead to senior leader buy-in. This is really important. You got to get them to buy in. And what's more, they teach people to learn how to learn, which is arguably the most important skill of the future of all. So if you are looking for an out-of-the-box competency assessment and development tool with the skills of the future and experiential competency-based learning built right in, or any part of that package, please feel free to contact us after the presentation. But now I want to share with you, and I know we've got some questions that are coming up. I want to share with you the links that we had. So first off, in the right-hand corner, you've got a link to download the PowerPoint. We've also got a recap to some other helpful links that we talked about. We also talked about skill practices and how you might want to create them yourself. That's what these first two links are. There are additional materials and events to help you. And we also have a LinkedIn group over here that will on upskilling and reskilling. And we welcome you to join that, and you can learn more about competency issues and ask questions. Now, I've got some questions that are already in the list. I'm going to answer the first two that came in as registration questions, and they have an associated slide. So I'm going to keep sharing my screen for a moment. So the two questions that someone asked that were somewhat related is how to determine which skills need to be developed, and someone else asked how to understand the new skills roadmap for the next 5 years. So the first source that I like to use is the World Economic Forum. I mentioned them a few times. Up at the top, you can see the URL. You'll also, when you get the download, you'll be able to click on these links. So they have a lot of different topics. It's easy to get overwhelmed. So what I would recommend is register and then select the topics, a limited set of topics that are of interest. So the ones that I personally select are workforce and employment, education, skills and learning, and the fourth industrial revolution. And then they'll send you information, or you can actually filter your view so that you can see and download publications. The two that are really relevant and targeted to what we're talking about today are these two I've linked right here. And then another great resource is McKinsey & Company. And again, this is one you can register for free. You get a monthly newsletter, register for the people and organizational performance. And they also have it's almost like a microsite called the Skillful Corporation. It's updated periodically, and so some of the images that I used earlier in this presentation came from that. And so you'll get links to when they update that information. So I'm going to stop sharing, and let's look at some other questions. Remember, if you missed the actual detail that was on the slides, you're going to be able to download that, and I can put back up, before we finish today, I'll also put back up the link. Han, I think you send out the link to that as well. So I'm going to look at the questions here. So the first one, how can you easily assess skill gaps for every employee and apply appropriate measures to close the gaps while tying back to the competencies and measurable performance expectations? So I'm going to summarize that as sort of measurement. We talked a bit about how you do the competency assessment, right? So we've already covered a bit of that and how you do that. and how that is literally linked back because you have these skills of the future that you know are relevant. So when it comes to measurement, there are two different ways that we talk about measurement. We talk about adoption, whether or not somebody's done the assessment and whether or not their manager's involved. But we really want to get more into engagement. Are they developing? Preferably in a plan so it can be tracked. So if you want to measure change in behavior, then engagement in the actual development process is a leading indicator of that. And that's because change in skill can take time. Depends on what the skill is, what my current level of proficiency is, and what the target is. Like if I have to move a little, it might not take me very long. So it could take a while, but I don't do something to develop every month. Remember the learning treadmill. I've got to create a habit. If I can do that steadily and you're tracking the fact that I am doing something monthly, then my skills should change if I'm doing the right thing. So that's why development activity is a leading indicator of skill change. And then, of course, you'll use that. You take your baseline competency assessment and you keep measuring that over time. So maybe every 6 months, you compare the baseline to the current level of proficiency and see how that's changing. And then you can do the same thing with business results, which is why we recommend linking your model skills to those KPIs or the business impact. You can also correlate which skills most impact results, which is pretty cool. So that insight helps you to say that people who are increasing their proficiency in one skill, that moves the organizational needle the most. And then you can focus in aggregate on specific skills. So just as an example, maybe you'd say for salespeople, people who increase their capability with developing more extensive relationships have increased their sales in the same period. So that one skill bumps the needle maybe more than other skills do. So hopefully I answered that question around measurement. The next one is how to best handle a situation when a manager and an employee do not recognize any gaps after the assessment. That is, both of them say, I'm kind of good, right? I meet the target, and there are probably some people in your organizations who will meet those targets. That's actually awesome, because that's where they should start having an opportunity to talk about next steps. So some people might want to move into other roles, and this is a great opportunity to start shifting that conversation along the lines of internal mobility. What other opportunities? What do you want to do with your career? How can we help you to start improving? But not everybody actually wants to move or change. That's okay too. And maybe there is an opportunity for growth and change at this moment. Maybe they're okay right now. So the other thing that you can do is how do you leverage specific expertise in certain skills to help the team? Or maybe not just the team, but the organization at large. That's what we talked about when we talked about collaborative learning. If I'm really good at with 2 or 3 different skills, how can we leverage that to help other people? And if I can do that, then that actually helps me develop coaching skills. If I can be helping other teams, maybe I'm even on loan to other teams to help them or to train them in a particular skill, that's going to build my internal visibility. So now, again, it increases my value within the organization. So those are all ways that you can actually take advantage of, okay, the status quo is not okay. How can we continue to grow your skill or your expertise where we need it and help the organization? Okay, next one, how to effectively sustain learning and ensure continuous development after the assessment. Well, that really goes back to driving development, looking at those engagement metrics. So if you see that, after the assessment or, nobody does anything, I know I have skill gaps, but I'm not doing anything about them. Well, you have to tap into those internal motivators. And that's what we were talking about before. We talked about increased market value or increased internal company value and career advancement and all the internal mobility and things that go with that. You may even have an organizational structure that pays people for higher level of skill, even if they're in the same job. So that provides them with some motivation to continue to grow. But the recognition and the rewards that comes from being able to be an expert, closing those gaps, having higher level of opportunity, that's where we want to use that what's in it for me to drive that motivation. But if you've got a system that is tracking what they're doing, and you care about what they're doing, you want to see the what, but you want to see that it's happening regularly. Again, if somebody is doing something and then doesn't do anything, as the skills change, they are going to fall off, even if they have no gaps, because the skill itself is going to change. So even if I can do it now, doesn't mean I'm going to be able to do the skill that exists, how I should be able to do it tomorrow. So I've got to be able to make that shift. So everybody needs to be on that treadmill doing something, and you need to measure that that's getting done. And that means promoting that and getting not only individuals to want to do that, but getting managers to say how important it is that we keep doing this, and having their leaders say how important this is. So one of the things that we tell our customers to measure and to build into your operating rhythm is that leaders should be asking managers to share the development activity metrics, not what they did, because leaders don't care about that, but how many of your people are doing something each month. And if a leader is going to ask the manager that question, the manager is going to be sure they have an answer. They're going to be sure that that's a good answer. So they're going to be promoting and ensuring that people have the time to do that and that they show that it's important. And so that's how that trickle down works. Plus, of course, you've got the motivation from the individuals themselves, but that's tackling it at all different levels. Okay, last question that's in the list. When going through the skills practice, how do those in L&D roles ensure learners are getting the appropriate feedback? That's a great question. Typically, when we, like the way that we write skill practices and the way that if you watch the webinar and the step-by-step instruction that we recommend you do that, is that every skill practice has some instruction to it. This is how you do it. Then it shows you examples of it. Then you apply the technique using your problem or situation. And then there's a place for feedback. Now, the feedback may involve I present it and I find out how the presentation went. That could be feedback. Or I get a manager or a peer to provide me with feedback on it before I use it or the decision I'm making. Again, depends on the scenario. But there should always be some instruction, application, and feedback. When somebody completes a skill practice, now, again, this becomes a little bit more system related, but in our system, when you mark an activity that you've done completed, we recommend identifying, here's what I learned and what I'll do differently. Now, that's kind of a standard L&D thing, but there's usually not a place to actually document that. So in our system, we have a place to actually put those notes in. We even have a separate place that managers or additional people could put notes in to also provide feedback. If you encourage people to put in what feedback they get, then you can be reviewing those notes. Again, it's not something that you're going to review each time somebody completes that, but from a report perspective, you can be looking at those notes to ensure that good quality feedback is being delivered. And of course, because this is being applied to real work, the situation itself will provide the feedback. So let's say I'm trying to persuade somebody to do something. I prepare a presentation, I deliver it, and it doesn't go over very well. That's real feedback, and I'm going to go back and do something differently. Or let's say I delivered it and it went great. Again, that's the feedback. And I'm still going to learn from it. There will be little things I can change so that I can apply that again and again. That's also the value of the skill practice. I don't do it once. I use it again, that technique, every time I then solve a problem or prepare for a presentation or whatever the case may be. So I see that we're at the top of the hour, and I think we've got through all of our questions. I just wanted to thank you all so much for joining us today. It has been a pleasure having you here, and if you have any further questions that we did not answer, obviously feel free to respond to us. You'll get a follow-up email or use that LinkedIn group, and then you can pose a question and we'll answer it there. Thanks again. Have a great rest of your day.